لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا وقرة أعيننا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه إلى يوم الدين. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا وهدينا وخيرنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah, in our lessons on Maraqi al-Falah, Sharh Nur al-Idah, we have reached the section on doubt regarding our prayer and doubt regarding our purity. And this section is beautifully summarized in the Hadiyah al-Ala'iyya with quite a lot of nuances. And the basis of this chapter is that the hadith regarding doubt in prayer have come in three ways. Some hadith indicate that if you have a doubt, just start over. Other hadith indicate using your judgment. Other hadiths indicate going with the lesser of the possibilities. For example, with respect to the number of rak'ahs. So how does one join between these? Right? That is the challenge. Right? That is the challenge. So the ulama joined between the three, the Hanafi ulama joined between the three opinions, that يعني لأن إعمال النصوص حيث أمكن أولى من إهمال بعضها وإعمال بعضها. إعمال النصوص كلها, because if there are multiple texts related to the same matter, then acting upon all of them when possible is better than acting upon some and ignoring others. And the basis of this is النظر في المعاني. So they came up with this ordering, and basically the first time you have a doubt, you restart. Then if the doubt happens again in your lifetime, the basis is, and the midway is the basis, which is you use your judgment, because the principle is that when إذا تعذر اليقين يصار إلى الظن, when certainty is not possible, one exercises reasoned judgment. And that's what should be generally followed. Then beyond that, if you do not have any judgment, then there's a third option, which is to go with the lesser, but that is less optimal. Right? That is less optimal and less less desirable. It has consequences. So that's how they joined between the three sets of texts regarding it. You can find the related hadiths about those texts in Imdad al-Fattah, elsewhere, Fath Bab al-Inaya, etc. Right? Now, Imam al-Tahtawi points out that when the author says doubt here, doubt has a meaning in the Arabic language, which is you have ما قابل اليقين, which is that which there's certainty and there's doubt, right? Because whenever there isn't certainty, there's an element of doubt, right? 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 And he mentions that from al-Quhustani. Right? Right? And right, because there is a technical sense of doubt, which is istiwa al-tarafain. Doubt is when you're 50-50 about something, right? Okay, so he says, تبطل الصلاة بالشك وهو تساوي الأمرين في عدد ركعاتها كتردده بين 3 و2 إن كان ذلك الشك قبل إكمالها وكان أيضا هو أي الشك أول ما عرض له من الشك بعد بلوغه في صلاة ما. وهذا قول أكثر المشايخ. The prayer is invalidated by doubt, which is when both possibilities are equal with respect to the number of rak'ahs, such as doubting whether you're in the second rak'ah or the third. If that doubt if that doubt occurred before you finished, because once you finished, you assume validity, right? Right? بعد الإكمال يحمل على الصحة, right? You deem it to be valid. Oh. And if this doubt is the first doubt that occurred to them since puberty with respect to any prayer whatsoever, and that is the opinion of most of the mashayikh. وقال فخر الإسلام البزدوي said that أول ما عرض له في هذه الصلاة. He said that this is if it's the first time that the doubt occurred in this prayer, right? And that's difficult to apply, particularly in times when a lot of people have a lot of doubts. This would be unrecommendable. واختاره ابن الفضل, and Ibn al-Fadl chose this position. وذهب الإمام السرخسي إلى أن معناه أن السهو ليس عادة له. Imam al-Sarakhsi took the opinion that if forgetfulness is not a habit for them, then you just restart. وليس مراد أنه لم يسقط فحكمه حكم من ابتدأه الشك. Right? 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 That, so he said it's not meant that that the doubt, that ليس المراد أنه لم يسقط فحكمه حكم من ابتدأه الشك. Right? That someone who has a doubt is like someone has a doubt but it's not a habit. They're like the one who has a doubt for the first time. فلذلك قال أو كان الشك غير عادة له, or doubt is not a habit for them. It only happens rarely. Then you just just restart. فَتَبْطُلُ بِهِ. So the prayer would be invalidated by this, according to this opinion. But the first one is the relied upon position, right? عليه أكثر المشايخ, and especially in an age of doubt, the mashayikh are saying, you have to be aware of the time you're living in and the state that prevails. لقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا شك أحدكم في صلاته كم صلى فليستقبل الصلاة. If one of you doubts how much you have prayed, then let them start their prayer over. وقد حمل على ما إذا كان أول شك عرض له كما سنذكره من الرواية الأخرى ولقدرته على إسقاط ما عليه بيقين. And this was interpreted to relate to if this is the first time the doubt occurred to one, as we'll mention from the other narration, and because you have the ability to fulfill your prayer with certitude. Kamal. And it's only a hardship. The argument would be, well, but this would be a hardship. Said, okay. But if it's a habitual thing, that's when it's a hardship. وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ لَا يُكَلِّفُ اللَّهُ نَفْسًا إِلَّا وُسْعَهَا. Allah does not make a soul responsible for more than it is able. But if you don't have waswasa and you don't frequently forget, then this is not a hardship. That's the other opinion, that if it's not a habit, just restart. كما لو شك أنه صلى أو لم يصلي والوقت باق يلزمه أن يصلي. Such that if you doubt, have you prayed or not, and the time remains, you need to pray. Right? Now, there is another pathway that this is literally when there's istiwa'u tarafain. If you have doubt, which is, it's not just you're not certain, have you prayed 3 or 4, but you don't know, is it 3 or 4? Which makes the matter more expansive and easier, right? That if you really don't know whether you've prayed 3 or 4, then that's a situation where, unless it's a habit, you start over. But الظن في العمليات له حكم اليقين. That if you're reasonably sure, right? I think it's 4, but it could be 3. Then you think it's 3, that's not shak, because you have غلبة الظن, right? And that's discussed. Okay. What do you have? Okay, that sounds better. لم يسهو قط. That what's not is that they never erred, but that how I explained it basically, right? That they did not they were never forgetful, but that forgetfulness was not a habit for them. فلو شك بعد سلامه, but if one had doubt after one gave salam, أو قعوده قدر التشهد قبل السلام في عدد الركعات, or if one sat for the final sitting to the extent of the tashahhud and then one doubted about the number of rak'ahs, لا يعتبر, that شكه, their doubt is not considered. فلا شيء عليه حملا لحاله على الصلاح, interpreting their state in a manner that is sound. إلا إن كان قد تيقن بالترك, unless one was sure of having left it. فيأتي بما تركه, right? And then one does what one left. But they say لا ظن لموسوس, right? There's no there's no reason for the one who has misgivings. ولو أخبره عدل بعد السلام أنه نقص ركعة وعند المصلي أنه أتم لا يلتفت إلى إخباره. If one upright person tells one after the salam that they omitted 1 rak'ah, but the one praying is sure that they had done it, one doesn't pay attention to the one who informed them. But one considers, right? But the basis لا يترك المرء يقين ما عنده لقول غيره. One does not leave one's certainty, because لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. No one, Allah does not make a soul responsible for more than its ability, right? المرء قادر بقدرة نفسه لا بقدرة غيره. One's ability is based on one's capacity, not someone else's capacity. وإن أخبره عدلان لا يعتبر شكه وعليه الأخذ بقولهما. But if if two upright people inform them and they're sure, then one's doubt, meaning of their opinion, does not count, and one must take their opinion. Right? وَلَوْ اخْتَلَفَ الْإِمَامُ وَالْمُؤْتَمُونَ, if the Imam and the followers differ, إِنْ كَانَ عَلَى يَقِينٍ لَا يَأْخُذُ بِقَوْلِهِمْ, but if the Imam and the followers disagree, if the Imam is certain, he doesn't have to take their opinion. وَإِلَّا أَخَذَ بِهِ, but if one's not certain, then one takes their opinion. وَإِنْ كَانَ مَعَهُ بَعْضُهُمْ أَخَذَ بِقَوْلِهِ, but if some of the followers agree with him, then he goes with his judgment. This is when they're sure, right? But you know, when people are fuzzy, one doesn't have to pay any attention to their fuzziness. وإن كان إن كثر الشك تحرى وعمل أي أخذ بغالب ظنه. If the doubt becomes frequent, then one exercises one judgment, تحري, which is بذل المجهود لنيل المقصود, doing one's utmost to reach the desired conclusion. And one acts, meaning takes that which one is reasonably sure of, right? لقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا شك أحدكم فليتحرى الصواب فليتم عليه. If one of you doubts, then use your judgment about what appears to be correct and complete the prayer accordingly. إذا تعذر اليقين يصار إلى الظن. When certainty is not possible, one acts upon reasonable surety. وحمل على ما إذا كثر الشك للرواية السابقة. And this is understood to act with this and the other hadith, that this applies to if the doubt becomes repeated. And one is if doubt happens more than once with respect to your prayer, or that the doubt was not habitual, according to Imam al-Sarakhsi. فإن لم يغلب له ظن أخذ بالأقل. But if one did not have a reasonable surety, then one takes the lesser of the two, and that's less optimal. لقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا سهى أحدكم في صلاته فلم يدري واحدة صلى أو اثنين فليبني على واحدة فلم يدري ثنتين صلى أو ثلاثا فليبني على ثنتين وإن لم يدري ثلاثا صلى أو أربعا فليبني على الثلاث ويسجد سجدتين قبل أن يسلم. Right? Because the Prophet ﷺ said, if one of you becomes forgetful in the prayer and they don't know whether they prayed one or two, then they should build upon the assumption of one. And if they don't know whether they prayed two or three, then build upon two. And if they don't know whether they prayed three or four, then build upon three, and then perform forgetfulness prostrations before their closing salams. Yani lissahu. Forget at the end, prostrate at the end for forgetfulness. So that's how they join between the three sets of hadith. First ever doubt, start over. In general, exercise your judgment. No judgment, go with the lesser. But the middle one is what the Mashaykh say, it should be one's general practice. Right? And some even tighten. The first doubt is when you have no idea. But when you have an existing one, I think it's three, but it might be two. That's not doubt. You have غلبة الظن, so just go with that. وَرَيِّ حَالَكَ. Right? Because the difference between you're in prostration, you have no clue whether there's a second or third, that is shak. Because shak has two senses. You don't know whether it's the second or third, but you're pretty sure it's the second, but it could be the third. Then go with what you're pretty sure of and ignore the doubts, and you close the door of waswasa. Okay. فلما ثبت عندهم كل الروايات الثلاث التي روينا في المسائل الثلاث سلكوا فيها طريق الجمع بحمل كل منها على محمل يتجه حمله عليه كما في فتح القدير. So So when all three of the narrations from the Prophet ﷺ were established, according to our Imams, they followed the way of joining between each of the narrations for the reasons that we mentioned by applying each in its due place that befits acting upon it, as mentioned by Fath al-Qadir, right? And there's a nice explanation of this in Tahtawi. You could read that, and as he mentions, كما في فتح القدير, you can look here at what is in Fath al-Qadir. Someone wants to share it here, would be nice. So it doesn't hurt to dip in to your toes once in a while. وقعد, and one sits. Now you make your life difficult, right? So don't, if you keep going down to the third, you should go and talk to somebody, because إنما شفاء العي السؤال. The only cure for confusion is to ask, right? If doubts happen, follow the number 2 as your default, right? وقعد وتشهد بعد كل ركعة ظنها آخر صلاته. And one sits, if one takes على تقدير الأقل, if you're taking the lesser, then one sits and does tashahhud after each rak'ah that could be the end of their prayer. لئلا يصير تاركا فرض القعدة مع تيسر طريق يوصله إلى اليقين وعدم تركها. Right? So lest one leave the fard of the final sitting in its right place, when you could have a way of ensuring that you sit in that place. وَكَذَا كُلُّ قُعُودٍ ظَنَّهُ وَاجِبًا يَقْعُدُهُ. And likewise, every place that could be the first sitting, one must sit. So basically you have to sit in every rak'ah. Right? So you made your life difficult in that sense. Then he says, تتم شك في الحدث وتيقن الطهارة فهو متطهر. If one has doubt about invalidation of ritual purity and is sure about purity, then one is on purity. وبالقلب أي العكس محدث. But if the opposite is true, you're sure that you didn't have wudu, and there's a possibility you might have made wudu, then you don't have wudu, right? وشك في بعض وضوئه وهو أول ما عرض له غسل ذلك الموضع. If one has doubts about some of one's wudu, and that's the first time one has doubt in wudu, just wash that place. وإن كثر شكه, but if the doubt becomes repeated, لا يلتفت إليه, one does not turn to it, right? And there's an amazing quote of Imam al-Sarakhsi. He says, إنما السبيل في الوسوسة قطعها وعدم الالتفات إليها. The only way to deal with waswasa is to قطعها, is to block it and to pay no attention to it. There's no other way of dealing with it. So there's a difference between doubt and misgivings, right? Right? And there's really good principles related to this. Shaykh Alauddin Abidin has a nice section on shak and taharri. 2 sections actually, on shak and taharri in the Hadiyah al-Alaiya. You can share. We just put it as a resource with this lesson from the Hadiyah al-Alaiya, what pages they are, Amir Sab. And but separately, we don't have to put it for the lesson. It's one of the قواعد الفقهية. اليقين لا يزول بالشك. Right? And inshallah we'll be introducing the قواعد الفقهية slowly, but you can dip into it. Right? If you go in the Majalla, you can see, right, whether the commentary of Shaykh Khalid al-Atasi or any of them, or you can see it in the Madkhal al-Fiqh al-Am of Shaykh Mustafa Zarqa, the principle, al-Yaqeen, certainty is not lifted by doubt. And we mentioned these principles, right? They say, al-Yaqeen al-Asli la yazulu bi-shakk al-tari. One's original certainty is not lifted by contingent doubt. Right? وَالْأَصْلُ فِي الْأَشْيَاءِ بِمَنْزِلَةِ الْيَقِينِ. And the initial assumption about any matter is like your operational certainty. Right? وَالْأَصْلُ فِي الْأَشْيَاءِ الصِّحَّةِ. And the basis of matters is validity. Right? And so, okay. It says, وَكَذَا لَوْ شَكَّ أَنَّهُ كَبَّرَ لِلْإِفْتَاحِ وَهُوَ فِي الصَّلَاةِ أو أنه أصابته نجاسة أو أحدث أو مسح رأسه أم لا فإن كان أول ما عرض له استقبل وإن كثر يمضي. And likewise, if one doubted whether one had given takbir to begin, and you're already in the prayer, or whether any filth had fallen onto you, or that one had lost one's wudu, or whether one wiped one's head or not, if this is the first time a doubt occurs, one just restarts. Otherwise, not. And if there is more, one continues. And this is the general state, right? أما الموسوس, right? فلا يلتفت للشك. Right? As for the one who has waswasa, they don't entertain doubt. Why? Because someone who has misgivings, what happens? The shaitan is smart too. So he'll give you a different doubt every time. So, oh, I have to repeat it for this one this time. But then another doubt comes. So you won't always say, oh, did you wash your left hand? Then he'll say, did you wash your left ear? So then you wash your left nostril. And then you go to, who said you have to wash your left nostril separately? You wash your face, right? So you end up in this kind of confused state. Someone who has waswasa, if they've had, have you had any doubt before? Yes. Don't pay any attention to any other doubts in the future. Because al-waswasa marad, right? There's hal al-i'tidal and there's hal al-waswasa. There's a normal state, you got a doubt, you can restart, right? First time. But if someone is given to misgivings, this is not the hal al-i'tidal. That's a separate situation. The end of the Tariqa al-Muhammadiyah has one of the brilliant sections on dealing with waswasa. وفي العتابية لو شك هل كبر قيل إن كان في الركعة الأولى يعيده وإن كان في الثانية لا. In the Attabiyah it says, and this is another opinion, that if one doubts, did one give the takbir, then if one is in the first rak'ah, then one restarts. That's caution for the one who doesn't have waswasa. And if one is the second rak'ah, one doesn't. The safety is to assume validity and act accordingly. That's all one can do with it. Then you have Babu Sujud al-Sahu, Sujud al-Tilawa, the chapter on the prostration of recitation. The chapter on the prostration of recitation. So, just one second. So the prostration of recitation is quite straightforward, right? The prostration of recitation relates to either commands in the Quran to prostrate or castigations, divine censure of those who refuse to or fail to prostrate. And a command indicates wujub, requirement, right? There's an interpretive shubha, so it's not fard, but it's wajib, right? Because the command could be for encouragement here due to some potential evidence. So the hukm of sujood al-tilawa broadly is what we will see, right? That it's wajib. So he says, so babu sujood al-tilawa. He says, min idafati al-hukmi ila sababihi. This is from ascription of the ruling to its cause. A sujudun sababuhu al-tilawa. A prostration whose cause is recitation. At-tilawa ay tilawatu ayati sajdatin. Right? Sababu ila sababihi, which is at-tilawa ay at-tilawa al-ma'huda. Tilawatu ayati sajdatin. Right? The prostration of recitation is the prostration for the recitation of a verse of the verses of recitation. Because the al in at-tilawa, what kind of al? What kind of al? Al lil-ahd. Right? Here, lil-ahd al-dhihni. Because what are we talking about? Tilawa. What does the sujood relate to? Tilawati ayati sajdatin. وهو في الأصل وهو الأصل في الإضافة. And this is إضافة الحكم إلى سببه, ascription of a ruling, sujood. The basis of ascription of a ruling would be to its cause. لأنها للاختصاص, because the إضافة is for اختصاص. وأقوى وجوهه اختصاص المسبب بالسبب لأنه حادث به. And the strongest ways of اختصاص, of making something specific to another, is by the specificity of the musabbab, that which is caused in its relationship to the cause, the sabab, because what is caused, the musabbab, occurs due to the cause, the sabab. وشرطها الطهارة عن الحدث والخبث. The condition for sujood tilawa are the conditions of the prayer, right? الطهارة عن الحدث والخبث, right? Right? And Tahtawi quotes Sayyid Abu Saud, our dear Muhashi and Sharih, that its conditions are the conditions of the prayer except for the tahrima and niyat al-ta'yin, and you don't have to specify the right that I'm doing this for prostration. You just have to do it. ولا يجوز لها التيمم بلا عذر. You can't do tayammum for the prostration or recital unless you have an excuse, meaning an excuse that would permit tayammum on its own. واستقبال القبلة, and facing the qibla. وستر العورة, right? So شرطها شرط الصلاة إلا التحريمة. Its conditions are the conditions of the prayer except for the tahrima, because the takbir in sujood tilawa is sunnah and not fard. وَرُكْنُهَا وَضْعُ الْجَبْهَةِ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ, and its integral is the prostration itself, placing the forehead on the ground. Right? 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 And again, a Sayyid here and others said its integral is either placing the forehead on the ground, or the ruku' when valid, or that which takes the place of prostration or bowing, such as head movements for the sick person, or for the one reciting on a mode of transportation, that would be superior, right? So the prostration, actually or effectively, yeah, that's another way that people put it. Effectively are all these other things. وصفتها الوجوب, and its quality is that it is wajib. على الفور في الصلاة, immediately wajib within the prayer. And a slight delay does not lift immediacy. He'll tell us what slight delay is within the prayer. وعلى التراخي إن كانت غير صلاتية, and non-immediately if it is a non-prayer prostration. But التأخير بلا عذر خلاف الأولى أو مكروه تحريم أو تنزيها. But delaying a prostration of recitation, meaning outside the prayer, is somewhat disliked unless there's an excuse. So it's delaying it within the prayer is makruh tahriman, right? And some defined it by number of verses. Others said what would be considered an undue delay. وحكمها سقوط الواجب في الدنيا. The ruling of performing the prostration recital is that the duty is lifted in this life. ونيل الثواب في العقبة, and attainment of the reward in the next life. ثم شرع في بيان السبب فقال سبب التلاوة على التالي اتفاقا وعلى السامع في الصحيح والسماع شرط عمل التلاوة في حقه فالأصم إذا تلاها ولم يسمع وجب عليه السجدة وهو أي سجود التلاوة واجب لأنه إما أمر صريح به أو تضمن استنكاف الكفار عنه أو امتثال الأنبياء وكل منهما واجب على التراخي عند محمد ورواية عن الإمام وهو المختار وعند أبي يوسف وهو رواية عن الإمام يجب على الفور إن لم تكن أي وجبت بتلاوة في الصلاة لأنها صارت جزءا من الصلاة لا يقضى خارجها فتجب فورية فيها وغيرها تجب موسعا. So he says, then he explains the cause for the prostration of recital. So he says, its cause is recitation with respect to the one who recited it by agreement, and for the one who hears it according to the sound opinion of several opinions about the matter. And hearing it is a condition for the one who, for the hearer, right? So if the deaf person recites a verse of prostration, they have to perform the forgetfulness prostrations. But it's recited in their presence. The basis is that they don't know there's a verse of prostration recited, so they don't have to prostrate. And the prostration or recital is wajib, is necessary, not because it arises from either an explicit command or contains within it a refusal of the disbelievers to prostrate, or constitutes a following of the prophets that we are called upon, and each of these meanings is necessary, non-immediately. This is the position of Muhammad, and that is the relied upon position of the madhab on this point. And there's some discussion on which is the position of Imam Muhammad, right? So Tahtawi mentions that it's stated in the opposite by the author of Al-Nahr al-Fa'iq, but this is the chosen opinion. And this is a narration and this is the chosen one. And according to Abu Yusuf, and it's a narration from Imam Abu Hanifa, it is immediately wajib, even outside the prayer. If it is not one of the it's not a prostration of recitation within the prayer, because the prostration of recitation, given that is within the prayer and observing order within the prayer between wajib actions is wajib, then you have to do it without undue delay. And because what is due within the prayer, you cannot do it outside. Like you can't finish a prayer and then say, oh, I missed a ruku'. So you go do a ruku' just outside the prayer. So you have to do the prostration within the prayer immediately, while other prostrations are due non-immediately. ولكن كره تأخيره أي السجود عن وقت التلاوة في الأصح إذا لم يكن أي الوقت مكروها لأنه بطول الزمان قد ينساها فيكره تأخيرها تنزيها. However, the non-prayer prostration of recitation is disliked to delay from the time in which one recited it according to the more correct opinion. And there's a more expansive opinion that is not disliked, but meaning it is merely improper. Right? That is merely improper. Right? Unless the time is a disliked time. Right? Then you know, which is during sunrise, right at this, when the sun is at zenith, the moments before dhuhr, or in the time of sunset, right? Right? In that case, it's superior actually. It's not disliked to delay it till a complete time. And we'll see the details. Can you do it at that time? You should be familiar with that already. It's somewhat disliked. And the reason being because if time passes, you could forget it. So it is disliked to delay, i.e. somewhat disliked. ويجب السجود على من تلا آية مكلفا بالصلاة وليس مقتديا في غير الركوع وسجود وتشهد للحجر عن القراءة ولو تلاها بالفارسية اتفاقا فهم أو لم يفهم لكونها قرآنا من وجه. For it is necessary to prostrate for anyone who recites a verse of prostration. And they're morally responsible to pray. And they're not following someone else. Because you are not allowed to recite in your prayer, so you're doing something mamnu'. Right? وَالْمُقْتَدِي لَا يَسْتَقِلْ عَنْ إِمَامِهِ. And the follower does not just do their own thing behind the imam. And it's not in the bowing, because that's because recitation is prohibited by the command of the Prophet ﷺ in bowing and prostration. And likewise the tashahhud, right? Because there's a prevention from recitation in it by the prophetic prohibition. Even if it was recited in other than Arabic, in Farisi, meaning other than Arabic, by agreement. اتفاقا أي باتفاق يعني عند الأكثر, according to most. And there's some difference of opinion about this. فهم أو لم يفهم, whether one understood or not. بشرط أن يعلم بذلك, on condition that someone tells you. So someone's reading something out loud in Tajik. Khansab, do you know Tajik? Probably not, right? But if an upright Tajik person said, oh, they just recited a verse of prostration, then you'd be bound to prostrate for it. And this is, if you recite it, recitation is an act of the tongue, right? If you read it, it's not required. If you recite it, meaning you utter it. So in English, if someone says, reads the closing verses of surah, reads any of these verses out loud, prostrations are required. Why? Because the translation of the Quran is Quran from one part. Because the Quran is النظم الدال على المعنى, is the words that indicate the meaning. But the meaning is, if someone hears it, you say, what did he just say? You'd say Quran, right? So there's a شبهة القرآنية فيه من حيث المعنى. And there's a number of things that indicate وَإِنَّهُ لَفِي زُبُرِ الْأَوَّلِينَ. And it's not the Quran itself, it's the meanings. So the meaning يطلق عليه القرآن من وجه وإن لم يكن قرآنا حقيقة. So that's discussed in the books of usul. وقراءة حرف السجدة مع كلمة قبلها وبعدها من آياتها توجب السجود. And reciting the word of the sajda, the حرف كلمة, the kalima of the sajda, and with a word before or a word after of its verses requires prostration. Just like كالآية, like reciting a whole verse. المقروءة بتمامها في الصحيح. That is fully recited according to the sound opinion. وقيل لا يجب إلا إذا قرأ أكثر آية السجدة. The other opinion is that it's not required unless one recites most of the verse of sajda. And this was chosen by Zayla'i, and this is what is chosen by Ad-Durr al-Mukhtar. Right? The second opinion here. And there's ikhtilaf on it. But Imam Sawi's, Imam Mashrun Bulali's opinion is more precautious. That if you recite the verse of prostration in one word before or one word after, the safer thing is to prostrate. وفي مختصر البحر لو قرأ واسجد ومكث ولم يقرأ واقترب يلزمه السجدة. And in مختصر البحر, right, this is a separate opinion. Right? According to the relied upon position, if you paused, the continuity is not found, prostration would not be required. If one recited wasjud and prostrate, and one was silent, and then did not recite waqtarib and prostrate, one has to perform forgetful the prostration of recital. And he says, وَآيَاتُهَا أَرْبَعَ عَشْرَةَ آيَةً. Its verses are 14 verses. Right? And inshallah, of course, after we recite all these verses, you need to perform for 14 prostrations. But the way the Mashayikh read it, you prostrate it at the end, all in your own time. So the sajda is required, and we won't translate the verses because we're not looking at the meaning of the verses directly. You can look them up, بإذن الله. He says, فتجب السجدة في الأعراف عند قوله تعالى إن الذين عند ربك لا يستكبرون عن عبادته ويسبحونه وله يسجدون. Surah Al-A'raf, verse 206. وفي الرعد ولله يسجد من في السماوات والأرض طوعا وكرها وظلالهم بالغدو والآصال. والنحل ولله يسجد ما في السماوات وما في الأرض من دابة والملائكة وهم لا يستكبرون يخافون ربهم من فوقهم ويفعلون ما يؤمرون. والإسراء إن الذين أوتوا العلم من قبله إذا يتلى عليهم يخرون للأذقان سجدا ويقولون سبحان ربنا إن كان وعد ربنا لمفعولا ويخرون للأذقان يبكون ويزيدون خشوعا. ويزيدهم خشوعا. ومريم أولئك الذين أنعم الله عليهم من النبيين من ذرية آدم وممن حملنا مع نوح ومن ذرية إبراهيم وإسرائيل وممن هدينا واجتبينا إذا تتلى عليهم آيات الرحمن خروا سجدا بكيا. والحج ألم ترى أن الله يسجد له من في السماوات ومن في الأرض والشمس والقمر والنجوم والجبال والشجر والدواب وكثير من الناس وكثير حق عليه العذاب ومن يهن الله فما له من مكرم إن الله يفعل ما يشاء والفرقان وإذا قيل لهم اسجدوا للرحمن قالوا وما الرحمن أنسجد لما تأمرنا وزادهم نفورا والعياذ بالله. والنمل ألا, you said ألا, right? Yep. Hafs says ألا, right? Yep. ألا يسجدوا لله الذي يخرج الخبء في السماوات والأرض ويعلم ما تخفون وما تعلنون الله لا إله إلا هو رب العرش العظيم. وهذا على قراءة العامة بالتشديد. وعند قوله تعالى ألا يسجد ألا يسجد. I think there's a typo in my one over here. على قراءة الكساء بالتخفيف. وفي المجتبى and in the مجتبى it says قال الفراء إنما تجب السجدة في النمل على قراءة الكساء أي بالتخفيف. Right? Al-Faraz said that the prostration is only required in the sajda in a naml on the recitation of al-Kisa'i without the sajda, without the shadda, not Allah but al-ala. وينبغي ألا تجب بالتشديد, and with the sajda, with the shadda ألا, the sajda would not be required. لأن معناها, because then the meaning is زين لهم الشيطان ألا يسجدوا, because then the meaning is the shaitan made it seemingly for them not to prostrate. والأصح, however, this is what's mentioned in the Mujtaba, right? في الزاهدي. والأصح, but the sound opinion is هو الوجوب على القراءتين, that you prostrate for a naml according to both recitations of the shadda and without the shadda. لأنه كتب في مصحف سيدنا عثمان رضي الله تعالى عنه كذا في الدراية, أي معراج الدراية شرح الهداية, because it's written in the mushaf of Sayyidina Uthman to prostrate here, as mentioned in the diraya شرح الهداية. والسجدة إنما يؤمن بآياتنا الذين إذا ذكروا بها خروا سجدا وسبحوا بحمد ربهم وهم لا يستكبرون. وصاد وظن عمر having vision. Can you read?
وظن داود أنما فتناه فاستغفر ربه وخر راكعا وأناب فغفرنا له ذلك وإن له عندنا لزلفى وحسن مآب.
وهذا هو الأولى كما قال الزيلعي. This is the more correct position as mentioned as الزيلعي. هذا مما قال الزيلعي. This is superior to what الزيلعي said. So it's required عند قوله تعالى وخر راكعا وأناب, that he went down prostrate and was penitent. وعند بعضهم عند قوله تعالى وحسن مآب, and that that's superior then, and others said that one prostrates when it says وحسن مآب لما نذكره, for what we will mention.
وحميم السجدة فإن استكبروا فالذين عند ربك يسبحون له بالليل والنهار وهم لا يسأمون, من قوله تعالى ومن آياته الليل والنهار والشمس والقمر لا تسجدوا للشمس ولا للقمر واسجدوا لله الذي خلقهن إن كنتم إياه تعبدون فإن استكبروا فالذين عند ربك يسبحون له بالليل والنهار وهم لا يسأمون.
And this is, he says, وهذا على مذهبنا, this is our madhab. وهو المروي عن ابن عباس ووائل بن حجر رضي الله تعالى عنه. وعند الشافعي رضي الله تعالى عنه ورحمه عند قوله تعالى إن كنتم إياه تعبدون. Right? وهو مذهب سيدنا علي ومروي عن ابن مسعود وابن عمر. ورجح أئمتنا الأول أخذا بالاحتياط. Our imams took the first choosing caution عند اختلاف مذاهب الصحابة, when the opinions of the Sahaba differ. فإن السجدة لو وجبت عند قوله تعالى تعبدون فالتأخير إلى قوله لا يسأمون لا يضر ويخرج عن الواجب, because the prostration, if it's required, when we say تعبدون, then which is the earlier, which is what the Imam Shafi'i said, that's when it becomes required. Then delaying it till لا يسأمون, which is where we say the prostration is required, does not harm, and one fulfills the wajib in both counts. ولو وجدت عند قوله تعالى لا يسأمون, if it were required there, لكانت السجدة المرادة قبله حاصلة قبل وجوبها. Then if one prostrated and it turned out to be required after that, because the prostration is only required upon recitation. So if you prostrated at the earlier part, then the verse of prostration were later, an earlier prostration does not fulfill the requirement to prostrate later. Like, let's say someone's going to do a khatm of Quran that day, but while they're driving in their Uber. So say, you know what? After sunrise, I'm going to do 14 advanced prostrations. Can you do that? No, because the prostration must come after the recitation of the verse. So we acknowledge both opinions of the Sahaba, but ascribing it to the later one is more precautious for this reason. ووجود سبب وجوبها فيوجب نقصانا في الصلاة لو كانت صلاتها. And if you prostrated early and the verse of prostration was the later one, then there'd be a blemish in your prayer because you left a wajib. ولا نقص فيما قلناه أصلا. And there's no shortcoming in what we mentioned, because a slight delay is not a problem. وهذا هو أمارة التبحر في الفقه. And this is an indicator of deep knowledge of fiqh. كذا في البحر عن البدائع. This one mentioned البحر الرائق from البدائع في الكاساني. And then he meaning of our imams, of how they joined between the opinions of the companions on ففيما قلته قبله في صاد كذلك وإلا يلزمنا التناقض. And the same thing would apply in what we mentioned regarding Surah Sad. وهذا هو الوجه الذي وعدنا به. And this is the meaning that we promised earlier. وفي النجم عند قوله تعالى أفمن هذا الحديث تعجبون وتضحكون ولا تبكون وأنتم سامدون فاسجدوا لله واعبدوا. Right? وفي إذا السماء انشقت عند قوله تعالى فما لهم لا يؤمنون وإذا قرئ عليهم القرآن لا يسجدون. وفي اقرأ باسم ربك عند قوله تعالى كلا لا تطعه واسجد واقترب. ونذكر فائدة هذا الجمع أيضا. Right? And he said we will mention the benefit of this gathering as well. He mentions at the end of the merit of reciting all these verses together. We will continue from here بإذن الله تعالى. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق الخاتم لما سبق وناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. الحمد لله. Okay. الحمد لله. Okay. We'll stop there. والحمد لله رب العالمين. إن شاء الله.